My name is Megan Walsh, and I'm Assistant Director of Career Services. And with me are my colleagues, Julia and Sarah. They will be watching the chat for questions. If you have questions about anything that's being said, or if I don't explain something well enough, let me know, and we will answer those questions as we go. If you have something that's more personal or specific just to you, then that's something that you can hold on until the end, and we'll stick around a little bit later and answer those types of questions. So we're going to start this presentation, which is about how to be negotiation savvy. And we're going to start by jumping right into it. All right, we'll just do that. Okay, so let's start off with, what can I negotiate? Like, when you receive a job offer, a lot of times you think about salary. And that is definitely one of the things that you can negotiate on. But there are also a lot of other options that, even if the company or organization is not flexible on salary, you may be able to negotiate on some of these other factors, like perhaps a signing bonus or an annual bonus or stock or a relocation stipend if you have to move. You may be able to negotiate the number of vacation days that you are able to have. You may be able to negotiate, more recently, we're seeing like the mode of work. Are you able to have flex time? Are you able to work remotely? How many days per week are you able to work remotely? So these are all things that you can negotiate, along with like location. If the company or organization has more than one one location, you may be able to negotiate for a location that better suits you. You may be able to negotiate for like stock shares or even a change in your title. So these are just some of the things that you can negotiate. There is a lot of stuff usually in a job offer that you can kind of go through. And just remember that if you ever need help figuring out what you can negotiate or trying to get the best deal for you, we're here for you. Even after graduation, you're still eligible to use the Luddy Career Services. So if you ever have a question about a job offer, what you can negotiate, feel free to contact us, and we are still here to help. So those are just some of the things that you can negotiate. And we also need to talk about when you can negotiate, because there is a very specific time when this is possible. So we have this timeline here. In the blue are the employer sort of timelines, and in the pink are your timelines. And then you'll see down at the bottom of that timeline, we have the negotiation zone. So typically what happens is, once you have been invited for an interview, you start off by doing some basic research if you have time. And the most basic research would be like, what is the general salary for this type of position? And what is the location where I would be doing this work, if you're able to find that out. These are just some basic pieces of information that are going to help you maybe going into the interview. So during that first interview, you'll be obviously meeting with the employer, you'll be talking with them about the position. And after the interview, of course, you'll write your thank yous. You'll do any follow-up that you need to. And this is also a time where, if you haven't had time to do that basic research on salary or location, you may have more information after the first interview that helps you sort of refine that search. Usually there's more than one interview, especially right now. So we're just going to call that interview 2, where obviously you'll go into a little more detail. And then we're going to say that, beautifully, there were only 2 interviews. And after that, they love you and they want to make an offer. So when you receive the offer from the company, if you're interested in negotiating, it's important not to accept the offer immediately. So say that you are on a phone call with an employer and they say, we love you, we'd love to offer you this position. And then you can say, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. I'd like to know some of the details, if they haven't provided them, about the offer, like salary, location. Usually they'll give you like an offer letter or an email. And so again, you're thanking them and you're saying, could I have some time to look over the offer? And unless the company is a little bit sketchy, they're usually okay. They know that this is an offer that you have to examine it. They want you to make sure that this works for you. So don't be afraid to ask for time if you want to look over an offer. If an employer is not permitting you time to examine the offer or make any requests, then that's a little bit of a red flag. But yeah, usually if they've submitted the offer, you can say, okay, thank you so much. I'd like to look this over and make sure that this works for me and my budget. And the two things that you really need to ask for during this are their timeline for your response. So usually they'll say, within a week or within 2 weeks, or they'll give you a specific date where they need to have your response by this time, and make sure that you note that. And you'll also want to ask them for the communication method that they would prefer. So if you have questions about the offer, who can you contact, or who should you contact? And how should you contact them? So some places may want you to call them, some places may want you to email. Make sure that you know what communication method they prefer, who you should contact, and their deadline. So after you have that information from the company, that's when you are going to look over the offer and make sure that every part of it works for you. If there is anything that you feel like is missing, or you were hoping for more or something different, the fact that you have thanked them but not yet accepted the offer means that you still have the eligibility to negotiate. So this is the area where you can talk with the employer about different aspects of their offer before you decide whether to officially accept or decline the offer. So that's how that typically goes. There's interviews, an offer, you thank them, and then you get to decide whether this offer works for you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why this is so difficult. I told my parents that I was going to give this presentation, and they kind of laughed at me a little bit just because of who I am as a person. Personality factors into a lot of whether you feel strange about negotiating. I am not a very confrontational person. I always assume that, if I'm giving an offer, they're doing their best for me, the employer is. And so I would just naturally accept that offer. That's not necessarily the most negotiation savvy approach, but there's a lot that sort of goes into that in addition to personality, like cultural norms. So in the US, sometimes we have this feeling that even though, very capitalistic society, it's rude to haggle or to say, no, I need more. So that can play into it, a big fear there. Also, just like inexperience. People haven't done this very frequently, especially at the undergrad and grad level. This may not be something that you're very comfortable doing, but it does get easier with time. I was very nervous about doing anything like this, basically until I started this job and found out how common it is and how widely accepted it is, and how, very logical it is as well. So this is just a skill that you learn, just like everything else that you've learned in school. And also there's fear, especially right now, because the job market is so competitive. There's the fear that if you ask for more or tell them that you need something else, that you're saying their offer isn't enough and they might remove the offer. That's a very real fear. But we will also go into this a little bit more by saying that remember that when you're negotiating, this employer has already made the offer to you. They want you to be their employee. They believe that you're the right choice for this position. And as someone who has interviewed for positions before, has interviewed people for positions before, they don't want to do more interviews. They want to employ you. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about, whether you're comfortable negotiating. And as I mentioned before, negotiating is a skill. So the fact that you are making these requests and that you're doing it in this very professional way that you're going to learn, this is skill building. Employees have actually been complimented on their negotiating after they've accepted a job. So this is not necessarily something that this is not you saying, you're not giving me enough. This is you showing off another skill that's a very valuable skill for an employee to have. And if an employer ever immediately withdraws or retaliates in some way against your requests based on your needs or your questions, again, that's a big red flag. That may not be the best employer to work for. That may be sort of an unhealthy working environment once you get into it. I know that we don't always have the luxury of losing jobs or getting into things that we're not that interested in. But if there's ever an employer that just says, nope, if you're requesting more, you're out, that's not a super stable employer to be working for in the first place. So if that does happen, please let us know. That's something that we would also like to know about different employers. Another thing to remember too is that negotiation may not be possible. So some employers have very strict rules about, no, if you're starting at this level, here's exactly the compensation package you will receive. We don't have time, or we don't have the ability to negotiate or be flexible on that. And that's okay. If you have asked and they're not able to change anything about the offer, you can still ask for time to consider the offer. Again, that shows like maturity. That shows wanting to be able to think something through before you commit. Again, a great skill for an employee to have. So never be afraid to ask for time to consider, even if they say their offer can't be changed in any way. And so, okay, so let's start off with like the idea of negotiating money. That's typically what we think of when we think of negotiating with a job offer. So there are some things you want to take into consideration when you're trying to negotiate salary. The first one is obviously going to be your budget. If you haven't got a budget going right now, I know that's not a high priority for a lot of folks who are still trying to get through school, but it's a good idea just to have a basic notion of, if you have a car, how much are you paying for your car every month? If you take medicine regularly, how much are you paying for that? Will you have loans that you have to pay back after you start working or finish school? Do you have credit card payments or other payments that you have to make regularly that are going to be part of your post-graduation budget? It's just a good idea to start writing those down. There are dozens of templates online that can help you sort of automate the process a little bit. It's just a good idea to start now, and again, of course, build on it as you go. You'll also want to think about location. So if, depending on where the job is, if it's in San Francisco, the cost of living is going to be much higher than in Bedford, Indiana. So that's something to think about. How will you get there? Like, will you be able to, if you're required to change locations, you will have moving expenses. You will have to pack, you will have to ship things, you will have to, furnish the location when you get there. You will also have to think about cars and public transportation. Once you are at the location, if say that you are working in Chicago, how will you get to your job from your home? Are you able to walk there? Do you need money for public transportation access? And you also want to think about the market. So we're going to look at like how to figure out what similar jobs are paying for people with similar experience at similar companies. So these are some of the big categories of things to be thinking about when you're thinking about negotiating money. And we'll talk basically right now about like where you can find salary information. There are actually a lot of places online where you can look to see what different places are paying people at different positions in different locations around the US. Some of the common ones that I've seen most often, there's PayScale, there's Glassdoor, of course. And then there's something called salary.com, which goes a lot into the details of the specific job that you would be doing. You can see that here I've chosen an example for just a user experience designer / developer 1. So it gives a lot of good explanations about like what you would be doing in the job and also what factors go into calculating the salary. One of my favorites, however, is actually this site called h1bdatainfo.com. For those of you who don't know, the H1B is the work visa. It's one that most typically international students go on to after they're done with their student visa to work in the US. And the reason that I like this site so much is because with the H1B visa, for an employer to be eligible to apply for this visa, they have to prove that they're paying this former student or this employee what they call the prevailing wage, which is the average for job types in their company and in that area. And of course, that depends on skills and seniority, but that rule was created to ensure that international workers are not paid less by US employers for the same work that, for example, US citizens would be doing. So it's like a protection thing. And as you can see, the website indexes labor condition application disclosure data from the Department of Labor. So this is all accurate, up to date. And if you're working for an organization that has applied for work visas in the past, you can type that information in there. So I have done a quick search here. I looked for ServiceNow and the position of software engineer. I said, this will be a position in Chicago and it will be for 2023. So we can see that ServiceNow did apply for some H1 work visas for that position in that area. And you can see the submission dates on there. It goes all the way back to 2019. They've got a quick summary up at the top where you can see median and sort of the ranges of salary. You can also see that how many of the salaries are less than 100K. And for this location, for this job, it's pretty much 100%. They're all going to be below that for right now. It's also worth noting that they appear to have applied for work visas for this position more than once in a particular year. And that can give you a good idea of the fact that, so for example, in 2021, a software engineer in Chicago, apparently the prevailing wage for that they determined based on research and a lot of other documentation they have to provide was around $87,838. And for both of those positions, that was the base salary. So we might be thinking, okay, if you're applying, it might be difficult to negotiate the salary amount because it seems like they have a standard base salary. But do note that that does say base salary, and there may be some options to negotiate on different aspects of compensation apart from salary. There's also a site I wanted to screenshot I thought was very useful called Comparably. And they got their logo down at the bottom there. This is for, I think it was like San Diego, California. So the salaries are a little bit higher, but you can actually, so this, again, I chose ServiceNow. You can look by department and see what folks in different departments at this location are receiving. So this is also, I think, a pretty useful way to sort of compare and make sure that you're getting the fair market value or the fair company value for the salary that you've been offered. This is also useful when you're looking it up to do your basic research of if they ask me what salary I want, I can have this information ready and say, this is what I'm seeing is paid in this department. So it's useful for for pre-negotiation and post-negotiation. All right, so another thing that we think about is like the cost of living. And then, where do I find that? Again, there are a ton of sites online. There are a lot of different ways to find out like how much it costs to live in certain cities. Some of these are, there's Area Vibes, which is very good for like comparison between offers, to see, if I'm living here or living here, how much difference in salary would it take to make those equal? And there's also usually an article in the Forbes Advisor every year that gets updated with cost of living by state. There's a lot of good explanation and advice in that article. So just keep that in mind. That might actually be one of the first things that comes up when you Google cost of living by state. And then there's other sites, of course. This one, I think it's called Numbeo. I again looked at Chicago, and they've got estimated monthly costs with and without rent. And it also has a very good breakdown, very detailed breakdown for like entertainment. You can see below they've got like restaurant visits, things like that. So, they also go into groceries and, rent further down the page. So a lot of good examples. Maybe look at 2 or 3 of them just to kind of get a range. They'll always be slightly different, but by looking at a few of these, you should be able to easily figure out like, okay, this is about how much it would cost to live in this place. You do need to make sure, again, to like build your budget. So not only is cost of living in a specific location, just, the sort of surrounding prices of everything, knowing what you need. So for example, if you're renting or buying a place, in a specific city, how much roughly would that cost? Don't forget that you'll probably have to do a security deposit or down payment. There will be utilities to consider: water, electric, gas, internet. Sometimes those are built in to the rent, sometimes they're not. So that's worth knowing as well. And again, these are all things that you can kind of look up and get an idea for on those sites that I mentioned previously. And of course, there's the moving costs to pack everything, to get it to where you're going, your relocating costs, the furnishing once you get there. If you're not moving into a furnished apartment, you'll need things to actually complete your home there. Of course, there's gas and parking if you have cars, not to mention insurance and registration that you'll have to do every year, however often you pay insurance. And also public transport access. So if you plan on getting around by bus or metro or anything else, usually there are passes for those. So you'll have to also factor that in to part of your budget. And then of course there are your basic needs, like your food, your clothing. I hate that loans came third, but it did. There's medicine you'd be taking, entertainment, including like streaming services or gaming, childcare or pet care, saving if you can. I know that's again sort of a contentious topic, but saving is important if you can. And then also you'll need to have some set aside for emergencies. So don't forget to factor that into your plans as well. I know you can't plan for emergencies, but having part of your money set aside for something like that is a really, really, really useful thing, let me tell you. Okay, so this is the site that I talked about a little bit earlier called Area Vibes, which is good for like comparing those offers. So when you have, for example, you have 2 offers, and say, you live in Bloomington, Indiana, and you have an offer for $50,000. And say, for example, you have another offer that would be in Chicago. How much would you need to earn in Chicago to make it equal to $50,000 here in Bloomington? So it seems like on this site, it says that the equivalent of $50,000 in Bloomington is $55,112 in Chicago. So again, like good way to compare and see are these equivalent offers? This also nicely goes into a little bit of the breakdown of why these two are different. You can see that actually groceries and healthcare and utilities are somewhat cheaper in Chicago, but basically everything else goes up. So this is good information to have. Like when we're talking about research, we don't just want the specific numbers of like difference between salary. We also want to know why those numbers are different. And we'll get into why that is a little bit later. The three basics of any negotiation are be polite, evidence, and honor deadlines. So whenever you're negotiating, as long as you're following these three basic rules, this should be fine with employers that are reasonable employers. So you need to make sure, again, that you're being polite, that you're giving them evidence of why you're making these requests. And that's where the information that you've gotten during your basic research will be useful to you. We're going to look at some scenarios here, just to sort of go through examples of like what you should say, why you should say it, and sort of some of the potential results. So let's talk about how technique matters. So scenario number one, person on the left has said they've received an offer and they say, okay, but I want a $5,000 higher salary. And that's it. That's all they're saying. And then employer here on the right says, okay, we all want more money. That's not what we're offering. So where did this go wrong? It was in the technique, in the presentation. Where did the number come from? Like, why are you saying you want $5,000 more? Again, like everyone wants more money at their jobs. Why are you saying this specific number? And why should the employer consider this? They've made you the offer that they want to make. You're not giving them any reason by just saying, I want more money or I want this particular benefit. You need to let them know why you're making this specific request and what benefits them if they consider this, or why should they consider it. So let's look at a slightly better way to do that. In scenario two, person on left says, according to sources, and here they would sort of talk about some of the information that they use to find this information, or the sources they use to find this information. According to these sources, the salary is around 15% below market price for this type of job. Can we do anything to bridge that gap? And so employer says, okay, let me see what we can do. And where this one went better than the previous one is in these areas. This person is telling the employer where the number that they're citing came from. These are my sources. They're telling the employer specifically why they should consider this request and like why the potential employee is making this request, because the salary is around 15% below the market price, which is important for an employer to know. And they get bonus points for avoiding me versus you language. They have said, can we do anything to bridge that gap? So they're presenting themselves as sort of like a united front with an employer against this issue. So it's not me versus you, it's us versus this issue. Again, an employer may not be able to do anything to change some of this, but it's nice to be able to come into this as a team. So you're kind of considering yourself and the folks you're negotiating with as a team. They want you want to know if they are the right fit for you. So say, for example, that your employer is offering you a salary that is right in the middle, or right on the line of, okay, this is the market salary. This is absolutely what everyone in this company gets at this level. This is good for the area. This is, good with my experience. So there may still be some things, again, that you can negotiate, not necessarily related to salary. So they may not be able to change the salary. You may not even necessarily need them to change the salary because it's so, spot on, so perfect. But you can ask for other things. This is where you can also put in some information about other stuff that you could request, like from that very first slide. So here are some examples. Person has said in that top bubble, based on some industry research, again, saying that they did research, I have more experience in skill than this position requires, because this person has gone through and they've looked at different job descriptions for their, for this specific type of position. And so they're saying, I have more experience, for example, in like project management than this position requires. Could we change my title from assistant to analyst or coordinator? So you can sometimes negotiate for changes in title from something slightly lower to something slightly higher. This is sort of sometimes a little tricky to do. If you ever need help on that, we're happy to help sort of make some suggestions. You never want the employer to think that you're trying to get your boss's job, but you may be able to change the title slightly to better reflect your experience and how you're bringing more to the position than necessarily they required. So you can also ask for, again, like remote work or flexible flex hours. So for example, they can't do anything with salary. You don't need them to change the salary. You can also mention that, for example, the daily commute will increase my budget significantly, either through cars and the gas and the parking, or that public transport. You can ask, could I work remotely this number of days per week just to offset that? So again, you're telling them specifics about like how this is going to impact you, and also offering a solution. Like, would this work for you? And also in a way that benefits you, the potential employee. So another thing, again, that you can ask for is potentially a relocation stipend or a signing bonus. But of course, you do want to give them some sort of reason why. So this person is saying, I'm excited to work in this particular office in Chicago, but relocating and cost of living increase is going to be difficult for me, especially at first before you get paid. So then they're asking, like, is it possible to like get almost like an advance, like a relocation stipend or signing bonus? So these are how you can negotiate some of those other aspects of an offer apart from just salary. If they can't change salary, or if the salary is, absolutely, inflexible, then these are some of the other ways and other things that you can ask for. So remember when we talked about like finding out both their deadline for your response and who you should contact? Those are some critical things when you're thinking about negotiating. So what you need to do are these three things when you're actually in the process. So first of all, you are identifying the person who is most important for you to talk with about this. If you've been working through an outside recruiter, they may not be the best choice, or may not be the sort of logical go-to person for negotiation. Often it will be more someone in the company, from their HR, potentially with your future boss. It will need to be usually someone within the company who can actually make those decisions, as opposed to an outside recruiter. You'll also want to kind of combine your requests. So you want to avoid, asking for one thing, asking for another thing, sending like multiple emails asking for each new thing. So say, for example, that you want to raise your salary by $5,000. You could make that request. And if that would solve all the problems, then great. You only need to make one request. If they respond to that request and say, I'm sorry, we can't do that, or they make a different request, then you can also have a backup. That's where you might be able to request some of those things that we talked about, like in the previous slide. Okay, if we can't change salary, could we think about doing a signing bonus? Could I be able to work remotely? That's where you can make your second requests. So you want to make your initial request and then have a backup in case they can't do that thing that you requested. This is also a little bit of a psychological thing, because if people have denied you something, they typically are more anxious to be able to approve. Again, that doesn't always work, but it's just sort of a human thing. So even if you don't accept the offer, make sure that you let your team, which is like the people you have been negotiating with, your potential boss, let them know that you appreciate their willingness to do this with you, to talk it through, to make sure that the offer works for you. So you want to be sure to communicate in the most effective way with the right person, not to send hundreds and hundreds of requests, and combine the things that you want, and also to thank them, whether you accept or decline. And it's important to know that you can do it. Like, we have all had issues in the past with making requests of employers. We are here to help. So if you need assistance, if you want help working through what you can negotiate, what would be best for you, what aspects of this offer are useful, what aspects are not as useful, we're happy to help you evaluate them. Again, even after you graduate, Luddy Career Services is here for you. You can always email us. You're still eligible to make appointments through Handshake. So let us know what you need, and we will be here for it.